Hey everyone, welcome back to Not Your Average Breakdown podcast, where we dive into all sorts of current events and topics that pique our interest. I'm Claudia, and joining me as always is my fabulous co-host, Alex. Hey Alex. Hey
Hi,
girl.
Claude. Thanks for that intro.
Yeah, no problem. A little sad. I think we're both a little sad today. We thought we had a special little surprise for everyone, but Mother Nature had other plans for us.
Yes, before we get into our episode, I want to give shout out to Ali and Vic, our friends who are hosting me this weekend, I guess, and letting me stay here. As you can see behind me, it's a Harry Potter shrine right here.
They should charge you to stay there.
I know.
That stuff is legit.
Don't tell anyone.
Another special thing about the weekend, the reason why that you're even up here is that it's your bachelorette weekend.
Yes.
Woo! This is going to be a crazy weekend. So we managed to tape this podcast anyways. So that's how much we care about our listeners, being consistent for you guys. So happy to be here. Happy to see you. Even though you're down in Norwalk, it feels different. So this week, we are discussing the recent headline that a judge struck down the Corporate Transparency Act. Now, I know nothing about this, but as Alex and I have a couple of business ventures together, it does pertain to us. So it is something that is a topic that I'd like to discuss today. So here we are, and you guys are along for the ride.
All right. I am super excited about this topic because this is my bread and butter.
Good Lord, woman.
And when I saw it in the headlines a few days ago, when I sent it to you, I was like, oh my God, let's cover this because I think that this is a very interesting topic. It is quite important for anybody who owns a small business, an LLC, has a side gig, has a part-time side hustle that they're earning some revenue from. If they are an LLC, a 25% owner or an officer in an LLC, this pertains to them. Okay. And so I thought that's a pretty broad audience.
Yeah, that could be anybody.
Yeah, literally. There are millions of businesses, small businesses in United States. So this pertains to a wider audience. And I feel like stuff like this doesn't get enough coverage, especially we're in an election year. So that is all you see, one candidate after another, or, what's the president doing or not, what he's not doing. But you don't see the other important stories in the news, right? Everything is going around the election. But I feel like this is equally as important because it's affecting so many people.
Absolutely.
This gives me a unique opportunity to talk about financial crime, which I am very passionate about.
Oh, yeah. You get off, you sick bitch.
I know you don't know what Corporate Transparency Act is.
Nope.
And I know a lot of people don't know anything about it and when it was passed and why it was passed. So I'm going to try to break this case down in the most comprehensive way that I can. Okay.
Layman's terms, please.
Okay. As you mentioned, Corporate Transparency Act got struck down by an Alabama judge, deeming the Corporate Transparency Act unconstitutional. That happened last Friday. Corporate Transparency Act was passed in 2021, and the sole purpose of Corporate Transparency Act, and it was passed, it was a bipartisan issue, one of the very rare occasions that our very split and divided Congress ended up passing a legislation that they overwhelmingly were agreeing on, because it was supposed to tackle money laundering, funding of criminal organization, terrorist organizations, illicit drugs, all sorts of things, right? Illegal businesses, because there is a thing called shell companies and tax havens. You and I briefly touch up on that. It might have been included in an episode or no, but I know I mentioned like Pandora Papers, Panama Papers that were part of that. Remember, I was telling you Shakira popped on the list, and a lot of foreign prime ministers, foreign presidents, Russian oligarchs. They were, some of the former President Trump's cabinet members popped up on the list. Like it was a huge deal. Okay.
Mhm.
And it was done, and we covered recently concussion files that were published by the Washington Post. It was an investigative journalism piece. I think it was a really, really good, number one, it was a good episode, but it was a really good written case against NFL. And this is as well an investigative journalism involvement. So ICIJ, remember I mentioned them as
Yep.
well. They're international consortium of journalists, and it's this international network. All major news outlets, newspapers, websites, blogs, whatever you want to call them, they all sort of come together and they do these like bombshell investigative pieces. What they did in 2020, there is an investigative piece called FinCEN Files. FinCEN stands for very small government agency within Department of Treasury. So they belong to the Treasury. They're a very small group, and they're a financial crime enforcement network. Essentially, what they do is they're trying to prevent financial crime from happening, and that goes domestically and internationally. They're pretty niche. They only have a few hundred people. They're very small department. With each president, they get smaller and smaller, and a lot of people don't know this. But there is a trend going downwards since the Obama days. They initially had much bigger staff, and then Obama administration took down some of their funding and they downsized, and then Trump took their funding down and then they downsized even more. Now we see with President Biden, obviously we know that he's trying to give back some money to the IRS, which there is a lot of fighting over that, but essentially he's trying to give resources back to the IRS and Treasury so they can enforce these programs, because once you start slashing their funds, they have to cut on personnel and they cannot do their job effectively. So that's a little background about FinCEN. Okay. In 2020, the FinCEN had a whistleblower and they leaked these documents to BuzzFeed. And BuzzFeed reviewed the documents and they decided to share it with ICIJ, with this network of investigative journalists. They spent months reviewing it, pulling information out, and finally in I want to say September or October of 2020, they finally published this piece called FinCEN Files. You can Google it. It's an interactive, similar to the concussion files. It has pictures. It has, you can split it by countries, by banks, like so many things. So what this piece did is it said that essentially it was a failure of a system from all sides. So this leak from FinCEN had 2,100 suspicious activity reports, or SARS. That's what they're called, and they range between 1999 and 2017. So that's a pretty lengthy timeline right there. What these suspicious activity reports mean is each financial institution, like a bank that does transactions, they are required by law to file suspicious activity reports for anything that that might trigger their system. So let's say if something appears suspicious or unusual based on whatever criteria that the bank sets up or the regulators, that might include large cash transactions, multiple transactions just below the threshold. So the threshold for reporting is $10,000. I don't know if you heard that before,
I
but
have.
like every transaction that's over $10,000 gets reported to Treasury for these reasons, right? It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything illegal, but it's one of the things on the checklist that's going to flag, I'm doing air quotes, flag your account, and they're going to see like, okay, where's this money coming from, right? Because when you have larger sums of money coming into your account constantly, they want to see like, hey, are you doing business that you're not reporting?
Right.
Is this coming to your personal account or your business account or whatever?
They pay attention. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And usually like when you get, like, if you sell something and you deposit like $11,000 and it's a one-off, like nothing happens, right?
Mhm.
But if they notice that, let's say if the threshold is $10,000, but there is this business that it's constantly reporting $999,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, like it flags the system. And or it can be any transactions involving high risk countries or individuals.
Right.
So I mentioned funding terrorism or drugs or gambling or any of those illegal activities. And then patterns inconsistent with customers' known behavior. So like if something starts happening that it's out of the pattern for that customer, they're required to report it. However, what these FinCEN files discovered is that there is essentially a loophole in our financial regulation. And that is that when the bank is required to file this SAR, let's say you're doing these transactions and they're like, okay, we're just going to flag this. And they send it up to FinCEN,
What
and
happens to it?
then it just sits there because nobody follows up because number one, they don't have staffing. Number two, they don't have enough evidence.
Oh.
And so it slipped through the cracks. And then these files further revealed there are some repeated offenders, as in major banks, okay? So JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, which we learned last year that they ended up being acquired because they were going bankrupt. So there was an emergency buyout of Deutsche Bank. And all of this is because they had this culture of not paying attention to these things, and any major financial scandal that happened, Deutsche Bank's names would pop up on it. Okay, so last year they finally, all years of mismanagement, if you will, caught up to them and they went under. Okay,
But
so they,
but isn't their end of the burden supposed to be to report it? And then if they report it to FinCEN, then isn't it on FinCEN?
it's both sides. Okay, so let's say hypothetically we're speaking that there is this company that's doing business with, you know, whatever, Deutsche Bank.
Mm-hmm.
This company is a shell company, and I'm going to explain why shell companies are important and LLCs in this specific case. But this shell company is incorporated in a tax haven such as British Virgin Islands.
Okay.
Okay. So British Virgin Islands, because they're a tax haven, they have these secrecy laws or privacy laws, whatever you want to call them. Essentially does not disclose anything about the owner of the company. There is no name, there is no address, there is no personally identifiable information about the owner. So it's just this, you know, ABC LLC that it's operating out of British Virgin Islands. They're doing business with Deutsche Bank, and Deutsche Bank keeps flagging them, right? And they keep submitting these SARs to
Uh-huh.
FinCEN, but they keep
Right.
doing business with them.
Mm.
So you're constantly flagging this business like, hey, they're doing something irregular. There
Mhm.
is a suspicious activity that is constantly being reported to the regulators, right, to the Treasury,
Yep.
but you just keep doing business with them
Mm.
because the law requirement stops with that report. The bank is not obligated to do anything else. So they don't have to stop doing business with you, they don't have to investigate it. They just keep doing business.
Okay.
So business as usual. And what ended up happening is Mexican cartels were doing money laundering through all these shell companies because there was no names, no addresses, no phone numbers, no nothing, right?
And no repercussions for doing shitty business.
Exactly. And so it was clean money from all these drugs.
Mm.
Further, there were some ISIS terrorist cells that were funded, and the money went through all of these major banks that I listed and more. Okay, so 88 countries popped up on this list.
Oof.
88 countries that were engaged in some type of money laundering scheme that
Mm.
has been happening between 1999 and 2017. That's a huge number of years that these banks were literally collecting blood money.
Wow. So these files, they listed them all out?
Yes.
They exposed them? Yeah.
Yes. So they exposed hundreds of people, as I mentioned, dignitaries, kings, foreign prime ministers, foreign presidents, celebrities left and right. Okay. Russian oligarchs, obviously, they're on the list. They're always looking for a way to hide money and do business in the US because they get sanctioned a lot. But this is the way that it provides them with an outlet to do business in the US and still have money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their name is sanctioned, but they still have this business that we don't know who
Right.
owns. And this is like FinCEN files are one of many files that ICIJ leaked. Like they did, I said Pandora Papers, Panama Papers, those are two like major ones. And it all goes around the same concept. And the concept is shell companies. You and I, you mentioned we have some business adventures together and we own an LLC. And when we were creating an LLC, we were looking into where can we possibly open up this LLC, right? We were looking at different states.
Right.
And we were looking at different states because some states, like state of Delaware and Wyoming, they offer secrecy laws and they are considered tax havens.
Yeah,
And
other
so,
some states are more advantageous than others, and that was our goal.
yes, exactly. But we're not the only ones, right? Like
Right.
that
Absolutely.
you want to be where it's going to benefit your business. And that's
Absolutely.
exactly what we did. When it comes to LLCs, if you're opening them up in, let's say, Delaware, right? Just for the sake of the
Yep.
argument, because that is one of the most famous tax havens in the US and in the world. They're very advantageous for the corporations, but there is a record number of LLCs open up over there as well. Because to open up an LLC over there, open up a company, you literally don't need anything. Like you can just go online, open it up, or pay somebody. They have numerous companies that do it for you for like $30. So you just provide the name of the company and that's it. You don't have to provide any other information. When you don't provide any information, then that opens up the door for you to operate in secrecy. And then, sure, it's advantageous to you, like it will be advantageous to us that nobody knows how much money we're making because we don't want that to be a publicly available information. We don't want anybody, we don't want to become targets. We want to make sure that we're paying taxes only on what we're supposed to pay,
Mhm.
not on everything that gets, posted on the financials or whatnot. So there is a lot of benefits to having a secrecy law when you own a business. However, because nobody knows your name, you can smuggle drugs, you can fund terrorist cells, you can do all sorts of things. And I'm just gonna, I'm obsessed with Enron. Enron went down because of shell companies. So they were called special purpose entities. And essentially, what they did, they had a network of these shell companies. Enron as a company was doing very bad. They had a lot of debt, a lot of liabilities. But because they had these special purpose entities, they would offload all of their liabilities and debt onto these shell companies. And then they would have clean financial statement showing that they had all these profits made because they essentially had no
Right.
liabilities.
Right.
And so their stock just kept skyrocketing, making all this money. They were one of the greatest companies that we had until they weren't. And then they tanked in 2001 because, shocker, investigative journalism. There was a journalist that looked at their financials and was like, this doesn't make sense. How are you making this money? How are you booking this revenue? And then she started pulling the thread. When everything was undone, they had this like literally web of shell companies in these tax havens where they didn't have to provide anything. Who owns them, addresses, who are these people? And so
She's your hero. I could tell.
it is.
I know. I could hear the admiration in your voice for her. Like this is right up your alley.
I got into forensic accounting because of Enron.
Jesus Christ.
So that's like I don't know if we ever talked about that.
No.
But when I enrolled in school, I didn't know what I want to study because I have a fashion design degree that it's totally useless to me. And I went back to school sort of to just figure out what I want to do when I grow up. And so here I am 26. I just started a community college. My major was business administration because I just literally didn't know what I wanted to do. And my first class, my very first class in Norwalk Community College, was management. Our homework was to watch The Smartest Guys in the Room, which is an Enron documentary. And I was so obsessed with like how this elaborate scheme was handled. And when they were saying how they took down Enron, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And then my next class was financial accounting, and my advisor actually at the time, she was the professor for the class, and I like 3 weeks into my class, I changed my major into accounting, and here I am. I literally just started my master's degree 2 weeks ago. And I never look back. And I mean, I do fraud investigation and internal auditing currently in my job, and I love every second of it. So this topic is like very close to heart. But I figured talking about it, I can spin it to be interesting to other people, not just financial nerds like myself.
Right.
Because this is like, it's an insane story if you really think about it, like
Right.
how tax loopholes and financial loopholes are made in the US that impact businesses globally. So where do we left this off? Special purpose entities, right?
Mhm.
So do you think you have a good understanding of what shell
Yes.
companies are? Okay.
Yes.
Because of this investigative piece just blew up, and there is no point of return, right? Like this impacted governments, this impacted businesses. It was like a worldwide scandal. Other governments started implementing these laws trying to fix the issue of money laundering. I mentioned in one of our previous discussions that because of all these investigative journalist pieces that happened between 2020 2021, some prime ministers quit, governments fell down,
Yeah.
like whole, it was like a trickle effect. US in 2021 decided to do the same thing. They decided to pass an act that is going to fight money laundering.
They've already had money laundering protections.
Yes.
So what makes this different?
So what is different is that this act actually defines what businesses need to do when it comes to reporting to fight money
Okay.
laundering. The Anti Money Laundering Act, it really just spells out that money laundering is illegal and you shouldn't do it.
Right.
Okay, but there are no guidelines on really how to report your business information, because as I mentioned, a lot of states don't require that
Mhm.
here in the US. And if you have a business that is incorporated in that it's operating out of one of the tax havens, British Virgin Islands, as I mentioned, Panama. Panama is huge. That's why Panama Papers are called Panama Papers, because Panama is a huge tax haven. And they money launder the shit out of stuff because nobody was keeping track. And when you have tax havens, when you incorporate there or open up an LLC in Panama specifically, I know that from those files. And there is a documentary called The Laundromat on Netflix that talks about Panama Papers. It is amazing. I highly recommend it. It's very well done. When you have a company overseas like that, or even here in a tax haven, you don't have to list your name. You can just hire somebody to act as a president of your organization. So, what this law firm in Panama did, they started charging people to be their presidents. Okay.
Okay,
So, they
we've
would
talked about this before. I feel like
yeah.
we've touched on this. Yes.
So, they would literally just pay somebody, like some random Panamanian woman,
That's my
and
that's my VP right
yeah,
there.
exactly. And so she was like the CEO of like 200 and something companies, but she was like, her job was to be like a maid
Exist.
at
Yeah.
maid at the hotel, you know, like
Yeah.
she had no financial background, no nothing, but she was everything. She was your accountant, she was your VP, you name it, right? She had signature on everything. And so that's how they figure out that it was a scheme, because it was this woman that they were literally paying her to put her signature on, and she didn't know what she was signing. That's the worst part of everything, because that's what happens when you have a shell company or you're incorporated or doing business in a tax haven. Then the US doesn't get that information, right? They're missing information of who you are, where you live, what do you do, how much money are you making, like all of these things, right? They just don't have that information, and it's legal, it's completely legal. So they were like, all right, we need to tackle this, because my this is like strictly my opinion, is that they said, well, shit, if we don't do anything, then international community is going to be outraged, because everybody else is doing something, right? All of these governments are making changes to their laws. We have to make a change as well, because we're like one of the biggest economies in the world, right? And everybody does business here. So something needs to be done to fight money laundering. So they passed the act. It was part of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021. It's supposed to provide transparency into and combat money laundering, terrorism financing, and any other illicit activities facilitated by anonymous shell companies. And one of the main provisions, and this is where this was a huge intro, I'm sorry, but I feel like all of this information is important to understand what the CTA is and why it's now unconstitutional and how this affects everybody. But the main point of this act is beneficial ownership disclosure or beneficial ownership information. They said in this act that they're going to take 4 years to write this law, and it's going to go into effect January 1st, 2024. So I first heard of it probably summer of last year, because I saw some rumors on Instagram and people were freaking out. All these tax experts, legal experts, all these financial experts, like they were all freaking out because the beneficial ownership disclosure, US companies, small businesses in particular, and LLCs, they're required to disclose information about their beneficial owners to the Financial Crime Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. This is the first time ever that Treasury would receive such information. It would have to include individuals who are directly or indirectly significant to the company or own a portion or control a portion of business. So 25% or higher have to be reported. What they had to report was their full legal name, date of birth, residential or business address, and unique identifying number, or IEN, and then any form of acceptable identification document such as driver's license or passport. That's a significant information that now you have to provide to these businesses, to the government. Obviously, publicly traded companies don't have to do that, because that information is already out there and they have to file separate forms with the SEC. But that's why I said this is really targeting small businesses and LLCs. The whole premise is that this is going to be like a very, it's not supposed to create public database. It's supposed to be strictly,
It's for transparency, right?
yes. So, but it will be like an internal information to FinCEN and Treasury, not as a public record, right? So
Okay.
even if you provided your information to them, it wouldn't be made public. It wouldn't be on their website. It wouldn't be. But
Right. But
now,
somebody's got to connect the dots.
exactly. So now, but now we're talking about, okay, what if somebody hacks the Treasury? What if somebody hacks FinCEN? What if there is a leak? Then all these businesses' information are just out there, right? And not everybody wants their business information out there. That's why we allow to have shell companies, because shell companies can have benefits to it, right? It provides you with certain advantages, if you will, when it comes to receiving money. And obviously tax havens, they're legal, And it's perfectly fine that you want to do that because you want to preserve as much as money as possible when you're making profits. But they can also, as I mentioned, be used for some bad things. So it's like a fine line, right, that they had to decide. Okay, but we're really trying to combat money laundering and all this terrorist financing, and we know, like we talk about it constantly, the world is not getting any better by day. It's just getting worse. There is several conflicts around the world, and we're seems involved in all of them. So there are always bad actors, and they're always trying to find ways to clean the money, right? So that's why money laundering is so big still. This requirement started January 1st of this year, 2024, and you have it until December 31st of this year to file this form. Okay, and a lot of businesses already did it. However, in 2022, this group of small businesses ended up suing the government, and they're called National Small Business United, and they have about 65,000 members. So if you're a small business, you can be part of this organization. And they sued the Treasury, essentially saying that this is unconstitutional, that they cannot do this, that they don't have jurisdiction to do that, right? Even though if it's a congressional act. And the judge said, yeah, that's actually correct. There's no precedent that the federal government, that's a big distinction, right? Because we have state and federal government. Federal government cannot collect all this information. That exceeds the limits of Congress and legislative branch.
Okay.
And so he deemed it unconstitutional. However, there is a big piece. I was listening to a podcast today as I was driving. Yes, the judge deemed it unconstitutional, but only for the plaintiff. So that means only for this organization.
Right. The rest of us have to follow it.
Yes, but people don't know what to do now, because this is where my concern comes in, right? Okay, you deemed it unconstitutional for the plaintiff. Okay, whatever. But that means that I can put in a lawsuit and I'm going to have to win. Currently, I have to win. So why would I file that when I know that I can just sue the government and say, hey, there is a precedent set because of this judge in Alabama,
right,
saying that CTA, right, Corporate Transparency Act, is unconstitutional. So I'm not going to file, and you can come after me, because it
we
can
just
be.
saw it. We just saw it happen.
And it can be unconstitutional for them, but constitutional for me. Like, what makes the distinction, right? There is no distinction. And one of the arguments over that is that the fees that FinCEN put out for failing to file that are insane. Okay, so if you fail to file this form, or if you file the form and you don't, like, let's say you change your address or any of your information changes on the form, you have 30 days to file that. That's excessive. Okay, you're running a small business. We're not talking about publicly available or public companies, right? Like, they have whole departments dedicated to that. Small businesses, sometimes, like that one person, I mean, it from our business. We are the CEO, CFO, COO, accountant, bookkeeper, marketing expert. Like, we do all these things, right? Because it's just the two of us, and a lot of small businesses operate that way. So if you fail to do any of those things, a fine is $500 a day.
What?
Up to $10,000, and then you go to jail for up to 2 years.
What?
So that means, and one of the guys on the podcast, I really want to make sure I give them their credit. I think they were called Federal Tax Update. They were like, you can literally go to jail for not filing a form with Treasury and sitting right next to a murderer.
Yeah.
And I started chuckling at that, but then I was like, yeah, actually that's correct.
Excessive.
Go ahead.
What I want to ask about this is that what are the concerns with filing the form?
I feel like it's a couple of things, but the
It's
main
about
one
power?
is it's government is overstepping its reach. and they're trying to collect a lot of information on you that they don't really need. Okay, and I get both sides of the argument, right? The government is just trying to collect all this information and make sure that you are who you say you are, and that you're doing everything correctly. You're filing your taxes the proper way, you're reporting all of your money and stuff. However, this, as I mentioned, this judge in Alabama said like that it's an overreach. Like, legislative branch does not have this power to do that. And I'm going to extend that to say, and I'm not a tax lawyer, corporate lawyer, or any of that, but this is why we have states. Okay, and this comes down, like we talked about abortion, you and I, privately, right? Government oversteps sometimes, and they try to regulate states, but that's not their job. They're a federal government. That's why we have state governments. States decide what they want in their state. People are crying that abortion is illegal or whatever, but abortion is not illegal. Supreme Court just said, hey, it's not up to federal government to say it's legal or it's not legal. It's up to the state to decide what they want to do within their jurisdiction. And this is the same thing comes down to these businesses, right? Because now what they did is they deleted tax havens in United States, because every business has to file this information to FinCEN. But when you do that, you're taking away revenue from all of these states: Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada, I think South Dakota is on the list, Florida. A lot of these places receive a lot of revenue, right? Because you file your reports there, you file forms, you pay your lawyers in that specific state. Like, we file a whole bunch of forms in New Hampshire. State gets that money that goes into their
Right.
budget.
Right.
And now you just took that away, because companies are not gonna keep opening up here in the States. They're gonna go somewhere else to a different tax haven.
But my only comment on this is that we just talked about how there's this huge problem of money laundering, and we have all these instances that, clearly these companies were abusing the laws that are or are not in place. So, I mean, this is the only thought as far as I'm saying is, if we do nothing, is that worse? I mean, yeah.
Yes, I get what you're saying, right? But this is also an argument, okay? Because we do have an issue with money laundering and funding terrorist cells, and that's, I don't want to say it's my bigger concern, but it really is a concern.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
so huge.
not every business that is here incorporated in United States is committing money laundering.
Of course.
But now it's almost like they're getting punished, and they have to submit all this information, and then the federal government is going to have all this extra information on them that they don't really need. Okay, and some, we already mentioned, some of the requirements are a little bit excessive. I get it, they're trying to fight this huge problem that we have, but now they're imposing all this burden essentially on small businesses, because small businesses suffer. It's not the big corporations, it's small businesses, it's people like you and I. And a lot of people have an issue when government collects a lot of information on that. Now, I have a counter argument for that. I like to play devil's advocate always, but the government already has a lot of information on you. You have a social security number, you have an IEN, they already know enough. But do they really need to know everybody that's involved into? What if you have an angel investor? What if you have somebody really want to use it in the shadows, but like you have a passive investor maybe who owns more than 25%, but they don't want to be associated with the business? What if you have a couple of residences? How do you claim that? It has to be a resident or business address. But what if you're like, in our case, we're incorporated in one state, but we live in another? So how do we pick? How do we decide which address do we report? You and I have two different addresses, and our business is in a third. So how does all this play into that? And what are they going to do with this information, right? That's not clear. Like, yes, they said it's going to be for their internal database, but how are they using this? Are they going to use this against the small businesses? Are they going to hand over this to the IRS and then have IRS audit more small businesses and they're then bigger corporations? So there's a lot of unknown, and this is why people are very concerned about it. And there was an article that I pulled up from Journal of Accountancy, and it's a AICPA website, which is it's a accounting regulator,
Mhm.
and they said that they're actively trying to lobby the government to nix CTA, because like even the accountants, the CPAs don't think this is a good thing. Like it's not going to be good for business, and it's going to discourage small businesses from starting. That means it's going to affect our budget. It's going to affect a lot of states' budgets, and it's essentially going to affect federal budget. It's a lot. And I sort of knew something was going to happen because so Alan obviously also has a small business, and he kept sending me the videos from Instagram like, "Hey, we got to file this come January 1st." And I was like, "Wait. Just wait. Just wait. Like we have a whole year. Let's just wait." And then literally Tuesday, I open up my computer and that's like the first news that I see, and I was like, "Oh my god. I can't believe this just happened." And this is not over because I'm sure the government is gonna appeal, and
Right.
they're gonna.
That was gonna. What happens next now?
Well, we have to wait for the government's response. That's really what has to happen next. Government has to respond. The Treasury has to respond and say, "Hey, we're gonna take this to the appeal court. We're gonna take this to Congress, back to them, and they can figure it out." Or this might end up at the Supreme Court. But
In your opinion, where do you think this is going?
Um, I think there are two outcomes for this. Number one is going to be the Treasury is going to come out and say, "Hey, too bad. You can't do that because we're going to take this to the Supreme Court." But it can go back to Congress, and Congress can send it to the president. And we have a Democratic president who might say, "No, I'm going to make this an executive order, and then this is it."
Wow.
That still can go, it can be challenged in the Supreme Court. But I think this is just the beginning, and this can take literally years. So they might have to postpone the reporting deadline, they might have to make revisions to it. And yeah, there is a lot of unknown for this, but I'm definitely gonna.
Do you think getting to the presidential level is a little far-fetched? We probably won't go that far.
I think it's gonna stay in the court system because it was declared in a court
Mhm.
unconstitutional. So I think it's going to stay at the legal level, if you will, because the
Mhm.
president is not a legal expert. He's the executive branch. So are they going to take it all the way to the Supreme Court? Are they just going to take it to the appeals court? How this is going to play out, I don't know. But I've read and I listened to like 3 podcasts today about this, and they were all saying that a lot of organizations are actively lobbying Treasury to change requirements around that reporting. But then that also begs the question, right? What happens to the companies that already did it? Can they request
Mm.
their documents back?
At that point, isn't it too late?
Right? But if it gets upheld as unconstitutional, then they're not allowed to retain that information legally because it's unconstitutional for them to know all this information. So the government has to return the documents and not keep.
Oh man, this is a little shady.
Welcome to world of financial crimes.
Seriously, I would have never known any of this had you not brought it up.
Do you think it was a good topic?
Oh, yeah. I think that it was very insightful. I got to see a whole different world that I'm not privy to, and it pertains to us. So, I mean, I have a different interest in this for that, but I could see with the popularity of being an entrepreneur and starting your own business and your side hustles, that more and more people are applying for the LLCs, the private ownership. So this applies to many, many people. So I hope that it was helpful to other people, or even if you're considering to start your own business. So you have to be on top of all this stuff. There's no way I would have read that article and walked away and been like, oh yeah, I understood all of that, because had you not told it the way you did, I would have been very confused and I probably wouldn't have fucking read the whole article.
That's why I brought up, like, as I said, he was a big intro, but I feel like all that information was important to understanding, okay, why was this act passed in the first place and why is it now deemed unconstitutional, right? Because it was a domino effect from these FinCEN files that were published by ICIJ. And that really opened up a can of worms.
Yeah, that really helped
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
understanding how that affects where we're at now and then the future of that. So, and it made me question some of the things that you were talking about. So, but that's why you did it.
Yeah, that's why I want you to question things, right?
Mhm.
I want you to think outside of the box and ask the questions. We talked about before, like, oh, what if I ask a stupid question? There is no stupid question because we're discussing topics that, like, people, I'm sure, like, and I hope, like, our listeners would give feedback, but if they didn't hear it on this podcast, would they know
Right.
what this is about and
Right.
how? And they maybe had read a headline or something and they were just like, oh, okay, whatever. But some of our listeners are small business owners and they
Mhm.
have LLCs,
Mhm.
and this is very important to them. If you don't have an LLC, okay, maybe this doesn't pertain to you. But if you're thinking about opening up a business, you're trying to start a side hustle and melt candles and sell them online, this literally affects you.
Yeah. And that actually makes me so proud that we do what we do, because we are talking about things that people don't talk about every day. I mean, there are certain topics, of course, that people
Sure.
do, but we're also picking up on the smaller micro things that people aren't paying attention to, that affect everyone. So,
Yeah.
but it's not given the stage that it should be given. So, and then we talk about it here and we talk about it in a very digestible way. We always say that. So, I mean, this is a prime example. Like, I didn't think I was going to be into it, but I was into it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
tend to nerd out and just go on tangents with this
Yeah,
because
no, it was a lot to process. And so it was a lot of me just going, but it makes so much more sense. And I know so much more from when I started this episode.
yeah, there you go. That's a conversation starter right there.
All right, your water cooler talk, people. Anyways, thanks for tuning in to another episode. We hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as we did. Do you have something to share about it? Don't hesitate to contact us. Reach out to us on all the social media platforms or shoot us an email at nyabpodcast@gmail.com. We're all ears. Until next time, guys, thank you. And hopefully we return after a wild weekend for
I know.
Alex's bachelorette.
Pray for us.
Stay tuned.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.